When I first returned to Cedar Grove, I never expected my life would twist into something out of a surreal daytime drama. Seattle's skyline was supposed to be where my story played out. High rises, startups, and tech dreams. But dreams have a funny way of crumbling when the ground beneath you shifts. The layoffs happened overnight, taking with them the job I'd poured years into. One minute, I was writing code, planning the next product launch. The next, I was packing a cardboard box under the watchful eyes of security. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. The call came 2 weeks later. My grandmother, Margaret, had passed away. The cancer we all pretended wasn't winning had finally done what it always does. There's something about knowing the end is coming that doesn't make it hurt any less when it arrives. I'd always thought of her house, the Grand Victorian on Willow Lane, as an anchor. I just never expected it to become mine. But it did. In her will, she left the house to me. Not my father, not her daughters, my aunts. Me, the grandson who ran off to chase tech stardom. My dad said it best when we stood in the foyer together, the stained glass windows breaking the afternoon light into fractured colors that splashed across the old hardwood floors. "You always loved this place like she did," he told me, voice thick with something between grief and pride. He was right. As a boy, I explored every hidden stairwell, every dusty attic corner. I sat in the tower room by her side, watching stars through her telescope, while she whispered stories of constellations and family legends. It wasn't just a house to me. It was a living thing, breathing history with every creak of its floors and tick of its ancient grandfather clock. But history, I was about to learn, wasn't the only thing lingering in those halls. The first person to greet me wasn't my father or a neighbor bringing a casserole, but Patricia Williams, my grandmother's closest friend, her constant companion for as long as I could remember. She appeared from the kitchen without warning, like she'd always been there, her polished shoes silent against the wood. She spoke with authority about the cleaning schedule, dusting days, which silver polish to use on the candlesticks. Her words painted a picture of a woman who hadn't just visited this house. She lived in it, at least in her mind. At first, I chalked it up to grief. People hold on in different ways. I smiled politely, thanked her for keeping the house in order, but made it clear I'd be settling in now. Patricia nodded, though something behind her eyes cooled a few degrees. Then came her casual demand. "I'll need a new garage remote," she said as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't even know there were remotes to the old garage. "I think I'll hold on to those for now," I replied. That was the first crack. It didn't seem like much then, just an awkward moment. But if I'd looked closer, I might have seen the tremor that would become a quake. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of unpacking boxes, sorting through drawers of forgotten letters, and trying to get my remote job to work inside a house built before electricity was common. And always Patricia was there. Not outside, not waiting for an invitation. Inside. Always. Her key still worked, despite my hints. Her voice always seemed to cut through whatever headphones I wore, slicing into conference calls with the offer of potato salad or reminders about where my grandmother liked to store the good china. She wasn't just visiting, she was inspecting, curating, reminding me of the things I didn't know about the house, like she was the docent of some private museum and I was the clueless tourist. It wasn't until the rainy Tuesday that everything changed. I was knee-deep in dust and nostalgia, sorting through boxes in the garage when I heard the tires on wet gravel. I figured it was Patricia, because of course it was. But this time, she wasn't alone. A man in a suit got out of the car with her, holding an umbrella over both of them as they walked toward the open garage door. "This is the garage I was telling you about, James," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Plenty of space for a showroom conversion." I froze, an antique lamp in one hand, confusion in the other. "Excuse me?" She smiled, not missing a beat. "Oh, Michael. Perfect timing. James Cooper, from Luxury Homes. He's just here to give me a few ideas about potential upgrades." "Upgrades. Potential. My house." I didn't shake his hand. "Why are you showing a realtor around my home?" Her laugh was light, practiced. "Don't be silly. I'm not showing him around. Just getting some professional opinions." She gestured like we were talking about paint samples, not real estate deals. Your grandmother and I talked about this for years. Bed and breakfast, antique gallery. This house has potential. My grandmother's conversations with you don't change the fact that this is mine now, I said, carefully setting down the lamp. And I don't want you bringing anyone else onto the property. Ever. James had the good sense to back away. Patricia's smile wavered but didn't disappear. I practically ran this house for 30 years, she said, her voice low, tight. Your grandmother depended on me for everything. She wanted this. She left it to me, I replied, just as tight, just as low. And I want you to leave, now. It should have ended there. But people like Patricia don't leave. They dig in. You can't do this to me, she snapped, rifling through her purse. I have rights. No, I said, pulling out my phone. You don't? Not anymore. I'm changing the locks today, and I'll need the remote, and any keys you have. She held the remote to her chest like it was some kind of sacred relic. Margaret gave me this because she trusted me to take care of things. I'm not asking again. And then she said something I never imagined I'd hear. Number, I won't give it to you, and if you try to take it, I'll call the police. I laughed. I couldn't help it. You're going to call the police over a garage door opener? Watch me, she said, tapping her phone. And she did. 5 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled into the driveway, lights flashing. Cedar Grove isn't the kind of place where police get called often, and certainly not over remote controls. But there they were. I explained everything as calmly as I could. Patricia's story was a masterpiece of manipulation. Years of friendship, promises made, responsibilities carried. Officer Martinez, sharp-eyed and patient, listened, nodded, and then asked the question Patricia hadn't expected. Do you have any legal documentation granting you access to this property? Patricia stammered, dug through her purse for text messages and photos. Martinez shook her head. Those aren't legal documents. I had something better. Footage from the new security cameras I'd installed the week before. There she was at 2 a.m., trying her old key, fiddling with the keypad. Her face drained of color when I showed them. She was given a choice. Return the remote or face charges. The remote hit the ground. Patricia hit the breaking point. This house was my life, she sobbed. Margaret was my life. You can't take this away from me. But I could, and I did, and I filed for a restraining order. The news spread fast. Neighbors picked sides. Some said Patricia had earned a place in that house. Others whispered about her unhealthy attachment. And me? I just wanted to move on. But then my father handed me a diary, my grandmother's diary. It had been tucked away in his attic. Inside were years of entries about Patricia, about their friendship, and about Margaret's growing worry. She spends more time here than at her own home, one entry read. I worry I'm giving her a crutch she shouldn't lean on. The last entry broke me. I'm leaving the house to Michael. Patricia won't understand. But he loves this house for what it is, not what it means. Patricia was never supposed to inherit the house. She was supposed to find her way back to her own life. But she hadn't. And now she was suing me. I didn't call a lawyer. I called Reverend Thompson, the man who had counseled them both for years, and I asked for a meeting. When Patricia arrived, she looked like someone preparing for war. But when I read from the diary, something in her cracked. The lawyer stayed quiet while Patricia wept. She knew, Patricia whispered. All this time, she knew. She did, I said, and she wanted you to heal, not hold on. Reverend Thompson offered an idea. The church had a vacant cottage. It needed someone to restore it, turn it into something for the community. For the first time in months, I saw something in Patricia's eyes that wasn't anger. It was hope. 6 months later, she stood at the entrance of the Heritage House Community Center, giving tours, telling stories, preserving history. We're not friends, but we found something close to peace. The house on Willow Lane is mine. The garage remote is framed behind glass at the center, a reminder of how the smallest things can set off the biggest changes. Spring in Cedar Grove has a way of making everything look softer, even the sharp edges of old wounds. The town itself seemed to exhale, shedding winter's cold grip and inviting people to stroll the streets again. On those mornings, I'd stand on the wide wraparound porch of my grandparents' Victorian house with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun creep across the carved railings and gingerbread trim. Life had settled into something quieter by then. No police lights, no shouting in the driveway. Just me, the house, and the slow work of turning it into a home again. But life, real life, is rarely content to stay quiet for long. After the drama with Patricia died down and the Heritage House Community Center opened its doors, I thought the storm had passed. Patricia had found a new purpose and no longer hovered at my doorstep. The townspeople stopped whispering about garage remotes and lawsuits. People had moved on. I had too. I spent weeks restoring the house room by room, sanding the old banisters until they gleamed like honey, reupholstering the parlor chairs with fabric I found in my grandmother's attic, the same floral print she loved back when I was a kid. My job allowed me to work remotely, and for the first time in years I felt rooted, stable, maybe even content. That's when the letters started arriving. At first I thought they were just more condolences. Cedar Grove was full of kind-hearted people who remembered my grandmother with genuine affection. The first envelope was handwritten, the script neat and old-fashioned. I opened it over breakfast one morning. It wasn't a condolence, it was a warning. "You don't understand what you've inherited," it read. "Margaret protected that house for a reason. Be careful who you trust." I stared at the letter, half expecting someone to pop out from behind the lilacs with a hidden camera, laughing about how they'd fooled me. But no one was there. Just the wind in the trees, making the house creak and sigh like it always did. The second letter arrived 3 days later. Same handwriting, different message. "There are things in that house best left undisturbed." I spent the night rechecking the locks and walking the halls. It's funny how a place you've known your entire life can suddenly feel unfamiliar. The grand staircase I used to slide down as a kid seemed taller. The door to the tower room at the top was closed tight, even though I knew I'd left it cracked open. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Someone playing games. Maybe Patricia, still upset despite everything. But deep down, I wasn't sure. One night, a week after the second letter, I woke up to the sound of music. Faint, like it was coming from another room. I sat up in bed and listened. It was an old song, a waltz maybe, slow, lilting, like something from a music box. The house was dark, silent, except for that song. I followed it, barefoot on cool wood floors, down the hall to the sitting room. And there, on the little side table next to my grandmother's reading chair, was a wind-up music box, one I hadn't touched since moving in. Open, spinning, playing. I closed it gently, holding my breath like something might shatter if I exhaled too hard. But as I clicked it shut, I noticed something underneath. A scrap of paper, yellowed and brittle, with a name scrawled in ink that bled through the fibers. Patricia's name, and below it, another. Robert Williams, her late husband. I brought the scrap upstairs, sat at my desk, and tried to make sense of it. Patricia had said she lost Robert suddenly, that the house became her safe place. But this made it seem like there was more, something she hadn't told anyone. I decided to call her. I didn't expect her to answer. She did. "Michael," she said, her voice tired but calm. "I wondered how long it would take you." There was no small talk. I asked her about the letters. She claimed she didn't send them. I believed her. But when I mentioned the music box, the scrap of paper, and her husband's name, the line went quiet for a long time. "You need to leave it alone," she said at last. "That house kept secrets long before you came back. Margaret tried to keep them buried." "What secrets?" she sighed. "Come to the Heritage House tomorrow. Bring the diary." I didn't sleep much that night. The next day I stood on the front steps of the Heritage House, diary tucked under my arm. Patricia was already waiting in the main hall, dressed simply, her pearls noticeably absent. She led me to a back room, one I hadn't seen before. Inside was a table cluttered with old photographs, deeds, newspaper clippings, all meticulously organized. At the center was a photograph I'd never seen. My grandmother, younger, maybe in her 40s, standing next to a man who wasn't my grandfather. It was Robert Williams. They were close, Patricia said, watching me process it. Before your grandfather. Before me. Robert loved Margaret once. I stared at the photo. Why didn't she ever tell anyone? Because she didn't love him back, Patricia replied. Not the same way. He couldn't accept that. He thought if he built her something perfect, she'd change her mind. The house? I asked, though I already knew. He designed it, Patricia said. Every last detail, even the tower room. He built it for her. But when she married someone else, he changed. Became bitter. Possessive. After he died, strange things started happening. I glanced at the diary. Margaret's entries hinted at unease. Objects moved, doors locking on their own. Cold drafts in warm rooms. I thought she was imagining it, Patricia said softly. Until I moved in. And you stayed? I asked. I loved her, Patricia replied. As a friend, yes. But also because she was the only person who didn't treat me like I was broken after Robert died. She gave me purpose. We sat there in silence for a long time, flipping through pages of the diary, reading entries that now made sense in a way they never had before. The letters warning me weren't just about family squabbles or legal battles. They were about something older, something deeper. When I left the Heritage House, Patricia handed me one last thing, a brass key. The tower room, she said. It's time you understood. That night, I climbed the stairs slowly. The key felt heavy in my hand. I unlocked the door. The room was exactly as I remembered. The telescope by the window, bookshelves crammed with star charts, a small writing desk. But on the far wall, behind a faded tapestry, I found it. A door, smaller than the others. Barely wide enough for me to fit through. Inside was a narrow staircase winding down into the walls themselves. And at the bottom, a room. Stone, hidden in the foundations. And in the center, a chair, facing an old mirror. The surface was cracked, but behind it, faintly, something shimmered. Something that didn't look like glass at all. The diary described it as the watching place. Robert had built it. Margaret had locked it away. She believed it was connected to the house's strange energy, the way it held on to people, the way it never let go. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that cracked reflection, but when I left, I locked the door behind me and sealed it with nails. Some things are better left buried. In the weeks that followed, the house changed. The air felt lighter. The constant creaks and sighs softened. Even the nightmares I hadn't realized I'd been having faded. Patricia and I spoke now and then. She still ran the Heritage House. Sometimes I donated pieces from the attic. We kept a polite distance, but there was a quiet understanding between us now. One afternoon, as I sorted through another box of old letters, I found one addressed to me. The handwriting was my grandmother's. If you're reading this, it began, then you know. The house is yours now, but only if you can make peace with its past. Don't let it consume you, Michael. Love it, as I did, and set it free. I smiled, folding the letter carefully and placing it in my desk drawer. The house is still mine, but now it belongs to the future as much as the past. And the garage remote? It still hangs in the community center. A little plastic reminder that sometimes it's not the grand battles that change our lives. It's the small, quiet moments, the choices we make when no one is watching, and the courage to face what's behind closed doors.